Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into design patents, but we aren't doing this from the perspective of an outside observer. No, we're looking at this straight from the inside, right from the examiner's side of the desk at the United States Patent and Trademark Office. Having sat on that exact side of the desk, I've seen firsthand why some applications just sail through to approval, while others immediately hit incredibly costly roadblocks. So let's get into it.
To really understand how an examiner is evaluating your filing, we've got to start with the official rulebook, the Manual of Patent Examining Procedure. And as you can see here, it clearly states that the drawing disclosure is the most important element of the application. Honestly, that's almost an understatement. In a design patent, the drawings aren't just some helpful visual aid or a nice attachment. The drawing literally is the claim. Every single evaluation starts and ends with the figures you submit.
Here's our agenda for today's briefing. We're covering 5 critical pillars. First, the single visual claim. Second, the 1-year grace period. Third, strict drawing rules. Fourth, the Docket decision. And finally, achieving the 83% allowance rate.
Let's start with Section 1, the single visual claim.
A lot of inventors and companies come into the design patent process carrying a utility patent mindset, and that is a fundamental mistake. A utility patent protects how something works, right? And it does that using long, extensive, written, functional claims. But a design patent, granted under 35 U.S.C. Section 171, protects purely ornamental appearance. It has exactly one claim, and it's always written in standard form, the ornamental design for the article as shown. The drawings have to do all the heavy lifting. They fill in everything the words don't say. If your product's main distinguishing feature is just how it functions, well, a design patent alone won't protect that. The examiner is doing a visual disclosure exercise, not a functional claim analysis.
Because you've only got that one single visual claim, even your application's title becomes a massive strategic tool. Examiners use your title to classify the application and figure out exactly which field of prior art to search. If you use a vague title or one that doesn't really match the common public name for the article, your application could easily get routed to the wrong examiner. And that produces an incomplete prior art search, which ultimately leaves you with a weaker patent.
Moving on to Section 2, the 1-year grace period. 12 months. That is your entire grace period. Look, if your design has been publicly disclosed, offered for sale, or actually sold literally anywhere in the world, a clock starts instantly. You have exactly 12 months from that very first date of disclosure to file your U.S. design patent application.
And here is the cold, hard reality. If you miss that 12-month window, the consequence is the permanent forfeiture of your patent rights. This isn't a guideline. It isn't a rule you can negotiate or get waived. From an insider's perspective, this is a fatal error that so many product companies discover way too late. They launch a product, it blows up and gains massive traction over a year or two, and when they finally decide they should probably protect it, the door is permanently locked.
Section 3, strict drawing and shading rules.
Assuming you're safely within that 12-month window, let's talk about the granular, technical execution you need to actually pass an examiner's desk, because this is where applications truly live or die. The USPTO requires enough views to completely and unambiguously disclose your design. For a standard 3D article, that typically means 7 standard views: perspective, front, rear, left, right, top, and bottom. And no, you can't just leave one out because it's boring or plain. If the left side is a perfect mirror image of the right side, or if the bottom is completely flat and unornamented, you can only omit those views if you explicitly justify it in writing within the specification. Without that written statement, leaving out a view triggers an immediate office action.
Now let's look at surface shading. U.S. design patent law is incredibly specific here, way more so than a lot of foreign patent offices. To show the character and contour of a surface, you've got to use very specific techniques. For flat surfaces, you use parallel lines. For curved surfaces, you must use stippling, which is basically a pattern of dots that indicates curvature. Solid black shading? Yeah, that's generally not permitted, unless you're representing the actual color black or a very specific color contrast.
So why does all this matter? Because incorrect or missing surface shading leads straight to a 35 U.S.C. Section 112 rejection. That means the examiner is officially stating that your disclosure doesn't adequately show the design. You cannot leave anything to conjecture. When an inventor, or even a general draftsperson without specific patent training, preps these drawings, that amateur drafting just creates an immediate roadblock.
Another absolute game changer is the strategic use of broken or dashed lines. These aren't just a stylistic formatting choice. Broken lines are a highly strategic tool used to show what's called environmental structure. Basically, these are parts of the article that physically exist but aren't being claimed as your protected design. By using dashed lines for the rest of a product and solid lines only for your specific decorative element, you can strategically broaden or narrow the scope of your patent before you even submit the filing.
Section 4. The Rocket Docket Decision.
Transitioning from those technical drawing rules, we also need to talk about the strategic business choices around your timeline. Once your application is ready for examination, it just joins a queue. On the standard track, you're looking at roughly 18 to 24 months from filing to allowance. But the USPTO does offer a prioritized examination program, what everyone calls the Rocket Docket. This program can compress your wait time dramatically, bringing it all the way down to roughly 5 to 10 months.
But let's be clear, the Rocket Docket isn't just some premium checkout upgrade. It really needs to be framed as a strict business calculation. To even qualify, you've got to conduct a formal prior art search before you file. You have to submit an Information Disclosure Statement, or IDS, citing all those found references. Plus, you have to pay an expedited government fee, which is anywhere from $700 to $1,000, depending on your entity size. So you have to ask yourself, does a looming product launch, tight competitive pressure, or maybe a potential licensing deal actually justify that significant upfront cost and work?
Finally, Section 5, achieving the 83% allowance.
Let's contextualize the actual success rates at the USPTO and how everything we've just talked about impacts your outcome. The big headline statistic here is pretty remarkable. Design patents have a really high allowance rate of about 83%. But you've got to immediately tether that number to a massive caveat. That 83% allowance rate only applies to properly prepared applications, which begs the question, what exactly happens to the other 17%?
Well, here is the 17% reality. When an application drops out of that allowed majority and gets an office action, it is very rarely because of a prior art rejection. The vast majority of these rejections come down to drawing deficiencies. We're talking incorrect surface shading, missing mandatory views without that written justification we mentioned earlier, and broken line formatting errors. Remember, the drawings are the claim. So when the drawings are flawed, the claim itself is rejected.
But if you follow the strict rules, secure properly prepared drawings, and get that notice of allowance, the payoff is fantastic. Once you pay the issue fee, which right now is $520 for small entities or $260 for micro entities, the patent is yours. You get a 15-year term starting from the date of grant. And the best part? Unlike utility patents, there are zero maintenance fees required at any point during those 15 years. What you pay up front to obtain it is basically the total cost to own it. So, as we wrap up this briefing, I want to leave you with one absolutely critical question to ask yourself before you ever submit anything to the USPTO. Does your application treat the drawing as a mere attachment or as the claim itself? Because I can promise you, the examiner sitting on the other side of that desk already knows the answer. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and remember, always focus on the details.